Hello, and welcome back to I Love You Tea with Trashellie, not sponsored by Yui Hirahara. So, the past couple of episodes, we've been doing some deep dives into our characters, especially approaching them from the concept of what are their unmet needs and their goals, and kind of exploring how that has shaped their character and the possibilities of their potential futures and narrative paths. And so today we are going to be coming at it for our characters Meg and YuJing.
If you're reading I Love You and the recent chapter left you blue, or feeling like it's too good to be true, we get together and share our theory, bend down and praise the almighty Quincy. Come join us for tea with Trashellie.
They are a good foil to last week, I think, right?
Absolutely. They feel like a really good place to play off of Kosuke and Alyssa. And so before we get started, one of the things that I often say in my writings is that I tend to not talk about Meg unless I have a lot of time and space to do it. And with Meg, we have something that we don't seem to have in a lot of the other characters, where Kimchi has expressed that there is a difference in the way that Meg was intended to be written and come across and what her role was kind of supposed to be versus the way that it actually functionally ended up getting written and received. And so there's a lot of possible discourse about Meg and her actions in the series and what kind of role she plays and the way that this actually came through. But for this podcast specifically, we're not going to be talking so much about that because it's kind of a separate topic from what does the world look like through Meg's eyes and what formed her as a character and what her needs and goals are. Where, similar to our Yui episode, we're going to be looking at Meg's character from her perspective, um, as well as kind of in a worldly context, but in the context of her character, her internal world, her needs and goals, and that shouldn't be confused with justification of her actions or our perspective on how exactly she has come through in the story, because that is really something that would need a whole separate deep dive into with a lot of care to talk about that.
Right. I think it is very fair to acknowledge that Meg is a character who has participated in assault against Kosuke, and tonight's discussion is not in any way meant to justify or negate any of what she has done, just to talk about how her unmet needs and how her circumstances have shaped her and led her to making the choices that she has made.
Yes.
All right. We can ask our audience tonight, who would you guys like to hear us talk about first?
One of our members said me.
This new mic of mine is like right in my face, so you will hear all the giggles.
I personally feel like Meg and then YuJing is a good order to go.
Okay. That works for me too, because Meg is very much shaped by YuJing at this time, so it makes a really good narrative flow, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Meg, I feel like Meg is really interesting when we kind of when we really look at her in the situation of what is her family dynamic and her role within the family. We talked a lot last week about Alyssa's role in that family as kind of the golden child and the person there to make up for all of the perceived expectations and failures in their family that kind of all of her parents' like hopes and dreams are pinned on, that she's being funneled through. And Meg is positioned very opposite to that in their family. Alyssa is framed as the golden child because Meg is framed as the disappointment and the black sheep. And I say all the time that this is a very, very real dynamic in families where one child gets kind of antagonized by their parents and another child gets kind of like
almost glorified and
yeah, and like used as a vessel kind
yeah. Yeah. And I think it feels even, what was I trying to say? It stands out even more because Meg is the older child. So she
of.
is the one who presumably all of those expectations were initially pinned upon from the start. And it's because of how she, from their perspective, disappointed them and let them down that they eventually shifted their focus at all.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, when this happens with the older child, there turns into this dynamic of like the older child is a pseudo adult, and they kind of typically, when this happens, tend to hold that older child to an adult standard and with adult reactions. And that's part of how sometimes you get the kind of visceral reactions and fights that her father seems to often have with her. Like I will say, I saw that in my family where like the oldest child was made into a pseudo adult, and every time that they disappointed, it was a hostile and antagonistic event because of that role. Whereas a younger child, especially one that seems to meet the parent expectations, is a lot more able to kind of skirt under the rug and skate by as long as they fit that mold. And we see that very much end up shaping who Alyssa and Meg are, where because Meg wasn't able to meet their expectations the exact way that they wanted, she learned that A, she is not a successful or good enough or valid person, and B, that since nothing she can ever do is going to be good enough, then she just shouldn't even try. And that's what funnels Meg most likely into that kind of re- I hesitate to call it rebellious because it's not truly rebellious, and normally in these cases it isn't truly rebellious because the expectations are unfair. Um, but it funnels her into that rebellious nature and rebellious role where it's when it becomes clear to you that nothing is ever going to be good enough, you have to stop trying. And then because of that, it's like, well, I'm at least just going to do what makes sense to me to do because clearly I can't do what they want me to do.
Right. Because you come to that conclusion that what is the point of spending all of my energy trying to be what they want me to be if I will never be that thing? If I will never be able to make them happy, if nothing is ever good enough. Um, and that is a feeling that I am very familiar with. In my case, it wasn't quite the same thing because for me, I was the older child who was trying to be the good one. But that feeling of if you're never going to be good enough, what's the point of trying is something that was so very familiar to me. Um, and the thing about Meg is, like you said, it isn't truly rebellion because she still tries. You know, part of Meg buckling down and getting back to school and trying really hard is, like I think it's one part her own pride, but one part her sister is so successful. She's going places. Her family is so proud of her. What about her? What does she have to show for herself? Her father talks about how she's changed her major so many times. Everybody else her age already is graduated. They, already have their careers. And what has she done with her life so far? And obviously that's such an unfair argument because figuring out who you are at such a young age it's such an unfair expectation for us to put on people and to put on ourselves because who at 18 or even 22 really has any idea of what they want to be? And we're supposed to go to university. We're expected to know at 18 exactly the path that we want to go through life with, and then spend our money on that. And her father treats her like she's some kind of imbecile, like she's some kind of like he treats it like she's not even trying, even though it's clear that Meg changed her majors because she probably was trying to find what fits her. Who is she? What does she really truly want to do? And instead of treating it as, like, hey, let me help you, we can try and figure this out together, she's treated like she's not even trying. And right, like you get to that point where it's like, why am I even trying? But then she looks at her sister, and that's the thing with Alyssa, is when you look at her from an outsider, Alyssa looks like a person who has kind of been handed everything that she wants, right? We know that she is a person who has worked for things that she does want, the things that she actually enjoys. But we also know that when it comes to the idol life, it's not something she loves as much compared to, like, say, the actual songwriting and stuff. But as far as landing her career, it was the connections she had. It was the fact that she met a boy who she started hanging out with, who had a mom who happened to have connections, who was able to give her that in. And then here's Meg, who, feels like she's falling behind her younger sister. So right, like you said, it's not quite rebellion, because there is that part of Meg that wants to catch up. There is that part of her that still wants to make her family proud. It's just, I think she's very much that dueling opposite feelings of, like, on the one hand, why should I bother? But also, I want so badly for them to care. And
Exactly.
I think it's worth pointing out that Meg and Alyssa are very clearly a parallel to Noel and Kosuke, where Meg is very much Noel in the what's the point of trying? Why bother? Where we can see, even in Noel, just like Meg, there's that sense that there's no point in making effort for people who aren't going to care. But at the same time, they still try because they're still holding on to that hope that maybe it will be worth it. Maybe this time they'll be noticed.
And there's also that parallel in, like, with the kind of, like, rebellion that isn't really rebellion. Like, Noel has this whole narrative around him that he's problematic and unstable and violent, which is reflected in the way that Meg is perceived by her family, where, she doesn't care. She's rebellious. She's not focused on the right things. She causes problems for all of them. And the reality is that both of them were given a role or expectations that they could never fulfill, they could never meet, and that people are calling them problematic for just trying to live their life, truly.
Right. It's like, like I said, Meg is probably, she's been jumping majors because she's trying to find what really speaks to her, or find, both what she is passionate about, but also what she's good at.
And
And to look at that as, like, you're not trying hard enough. You clearly don't care. You're just wasting our money. And it's like, how, like, from their perspective, she's wasting the money. But for us, it's like, we know, how are you really wasting money if you're trying to figure out what's really you?
especially when there's so much pressure to be as good as Alyssa at something. Where, like Alyssa was the one with kind of the more natural talents in the realms that her parents valued, and Meg is chasing so hard something that she feels that she can be successful in that way at, because she thinks that that's the only way to make her parents proud and to gain validation. And so with the major hopping, she's both trying to find something that she enjoys enough to really make it that far with, but also trying to find something that she feels like meets the success standards set by her parents, which is, it's especially sad how strongly they chastise and reject her for this, when we know that their expectations are not ones that can be met. That even though it seems like Alyssa has met those expectations, that they are just expectations that are out of the water.
Right. Because again, Alyssa was given this. Like, I don't say this to put her down because we know that I have a very special place in my heart for her. But Alyssa was afforded an opportunity that it was all because of the people she knew, which, to be fair, is most things in life are you know the right people, you have the right opportunities, and you can go further than other people. But ultimately, Alyssa had an opportunity that Meg would not have probably had on her own. And when I really want to be sad about the Cho sisters, sometimes I think about the fact that Alyssa is living the life that maybe Meg would have actually enjoyed. Maybe Meg would have
Right.
actually thrived in the K-pop industry, whereas Meg is trying so hard to make herself excel in, the STEM industry, which is everything that Alyssa would have thrived at. They are both trying to be somebody that they aren't, somebody that their sister would have excelled at to find their place in the world and impress their family. Because, like we talked about in the last episode, so much of what compels Alyssa to stay in her career is the fact that her parents have decided that this is a successful thing, this is a good thing. She can't let them down now. So, likewise, Meg has to do something that is worthy in their eyes.
It's it's truly so sad to watch how the way that their parents pitted them against each other and made them into competition for each other fostered into that sense of envy and that sense of feeling like the other sister had an easier life when we know that that wasn't the case for either of them. These are two extremely neglected and traumatized and abused girls. And coveting the way that the other person was able to live and the life path ahead of them, and essentially like you said, like flipping their kind of life paths, where Alyssa was the one who wanted to be a biomedical engineer and Meg was the one who loved things like K-pop. And just it's such an on the nose flip, and it really illustrates the antagonistic and envious nature that was put upon them, that was bred there.
And I feel like compared to Kosuke and Noel, who we met them when they already had this antagonistic relationship, when they were well beyond wanting a relationship with each other, with Alyssa and Meg, we meet them when they're still getting along. But the more that we get to know them, the more we start to get that peek into the envy that they have. And it kind of gives us that indication for the future, because that's the thing about envy, right? It's ultimately what drives you away from each other. As much as Alyssa and Meg probably cling to each other because that's all they have right now. Meg doesn't really have other friends that we know of. Alyssa certainly doesn't. They're the only people that they have in their own family, but we can see how Meg's envy and how her family pitting her against Alyssa is already starting to get to her. Like the fact that they're like, oh, Alyssa's coming home. We've got to get the house nice for her. And it's just the way that those little things get to her, those little nagging things are, you start to feel like they care so much more about her. And like you said, you do start to feel like they have it so much easier. In Alyssa's eyes, Meg has never had to carry the burden that she carries. She's never had to, Alyssa is the one who has to be the good girl to make up for their father being so angry, because if they both are, if they're both disappointments, then the yelling and the violence is never going to stop, right? So she, the younger sister, is the one who feels like she's got to carry the burden because Meg isn't pulling her fair weight. And I don't think Alyssa necessarily thinks of it that, precisely, but that's kind of what it amounts to. Whereas Meg sees Alyssa being essentially given this success and how her family is lavishing her. Like you said, she is the one who found that she had more of those talents. She was a lot better at developing those skills. Even in middle school, she told Shanae that her sister wasn't quite as academically gifted as she is. And it's one of those things where we always come back to the worst thing is when the parents are the ones who are driving this, and their parents are
Mm-hmm.
the ones who are kind of fostering that antagonism and using it against each other.
And especially in a case like the Cho sisters, where like truly they do care about each other a lot and they want to be there for each other and they want to be support for each other. And like you said, they're all that they have. They're both trapped in this home together, but they can't even be true allies with each other because of the wedge that's being drawn between them in order to maintain basic safety in the home, basically. We're like, just everything that they do is potentially dangerous.
Right.
And I think with Meg, I think one of the interesting things about Meg and Alyssa is that a lot of the kind of things that are attributed to Alyssa at a first glance, and I'm not going to say either of these things as meaning a bad thing. They're often overly demonized, but things like validation seeking or attention seeking don't actually apply to Alyssa because she's the one who had that. Her parents were pushing her into those successes. They were giving her all of their focus and attention. They were like constantly being proud of her, literally telling her that it's great that Alyssa is how she is because at least one daughter isn't a disappointment. Whereas, like, we see her resent those things. We see her yell and complain about it to Shanae in middle school because she feels suffocated by it. Whereas
Right.
with
Because it's
Meg,
become a burden.
yes. Whereas with Meg, she's the one who was never able to receive that attention or validation, or anytime she received attention, it was like explicitly negative, and she was seemingly never validated in anything. Where she is trying so hard to just have something be validated and have something be good enough where she is she is chasing that attention and validation that she was denied her entire life. And that's ultimately why she latches on so hard to Kosuke, because we see in her flashback that she was struggling with her major. And if I remember correctly, it was like seemingly soon after her parents were yelling at her about changing her major too many times and she's wasting their time and she's wasting their money and they need to support Alyssa, and basically that whole "you're the family failure" narrative again. And then
So why
Kosuke
don't
comes
you
in.
go do beauty school?
Right. How patronizing.
So
Um
you like watching those beauty videos on WooTube.
it's like it's the fact that it's not even it's not a genuine recommendation, because like if they were actually like, hey, like you seem to be interested in really good at this thing and like you could be really successful, like is this something that you might actually want to pursue? But it wasn't like that. It was like, go do this thing that's beneath you instead because you're not good enough to do this thing. Where like
Right.
it's
It's
not that
like the
beauty
very
school is
least.
actually.
Oh, go on.
I was gonna say, like, it's not like beauty school, like, it's not like that as a recommendation is inherently offensive, because it's not. Like, beauty school is a completely valid path. It's the way that we know they were perceiving it.
Right. They were seeing it as like, this is the very least that you could do. If you can't actually finish school, you could at the very least just go do this then. Can't you succeed at something? Like, can't you succeed at
Right.
even this? Ugh.
And then immediately after that, after being put down in that way, Kosuke comes through and sees her studying and, you know, validates her and provides her that attention. And instead of belittling her, says, keep going, like you can get through this. We need more people like you in STEM. Like you can do it, and it's going to be awesome when you do. And so that was genuinely probably the first moment in Meg's life that someone actually validated her in a positive way. And for it to be something like her major and STEM, which has been like her ability to kind of succeed in that conventional way, in the way that her parents wanted, and saw success in Alyssa and saw nothing but failure in her, to have it validated by someone right after being belittled by her parents, and that someone is, you know, heir Kosuke Hirahara, we can see that it meant so much to her. And like, on the one hand, it's so sad that she never received that before then, but we see that essentially her response to the trauma in the home, aside from everything else we've just talked about, was to latch onto that in what ended up being an unhealthy way. But that, at least I interpret it as like that is what made her so obsessed with Kosuke in the first place. And there were probably things that added to it later on, but it's very pointed that we're shown that moment when we get Meg's flashbacks.
And I think the fact that she latches onto him in such an unhealthy way, further illuminates that this probably was the first time that somebody said something supportive to her. Because,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it was the fact that he was encouraging. And that's all she's really needed. All she's
Yeah.
really needed, it was for her parents to say, hey, I get it. This is hard. I believe in you. But they've never believed in her. Like, we can assume based on how she latches onto him, based on the snippets that we have seen from both her and Alyssa's point of views, that her parents, certainly not her father, have never, ever even supported her, have never
No.
believed in her, have never once said, hey, do you need help? They expect her to be able to apply herself and just figure things out and just do it. And it's like, you are literally her parents. That is your role. You are supposed to build these people up. And so, yeah, like, I think the fact that when she latches onto Kosuke and it becomes such an unhealthy obsession, like you said, it is clearly fostered by Yui's meddling, but at the very basis, I think it demonstrates the fact that this is the first person who is, she felt seen, she felt supported, she felt like this stranger looked at her and saw something in her that nobody had ever seen before. And she probably, like, she's clearly somebody who has been so starved for validation, so hungry for it that, like, you get that taste for it, and now, she can't stop chasing it. And again,
Right.
it doesn't justify how that obsession grows and how she treats them, but we can understand how in that moment, this hungry affection and, you know not even attention, but I guess validation starved girl saw in this stranger somebody or something, really, that she coveted so desperately, and how it made a mess out of her.
Yeah. And it's like very, very directly and clearly, both of the Cho sisters were set up for the roles that we meet them in by the abuse of their parents. Like, it doesn't mean that everything that they've done is right, but we can see just exactly how much the unmet needs that were put there by their parents not providing them support, as well as the way that their parents placed expectations and antagonized each other, fostered them and funneled them into those roles and paths to try desperately to get those needs met.
And it's just, at the end of the day, their parents really enabled everything that has happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is the most upsetting aspect of their household to me, is, like, especially when, once again, we look at families like Shanae and her father. And while Shimhan may not be around as much, we know that everything he's doing, he is trying to do the best that he can to provide for Shanae within the means that he has, compared
Mhm.
to what Alyssa's parents, who have the money, they have the time, they have the means, and this is how things go.
And
Hi in the chat says that her parents aren't actually caring about what path is right for her. They're constantly putting her down for not finishing her major because they view their children through their expectations of them succeeding or failing. They're not willing to give them authentic, unconditional support to help them find a good path for themselves. And that is ultimately what leads Alyssa to be a person who is being preyed upon at every turn, and what led Meg to, seeking out validation from whoever is willing to give it to her. And it's the fact that they made them into these people. They set them up for this. And it's that lack of concern. It's the fact that, right, they don't care about, are my children happy? Like, that doesn't matter to them. It's, are they successful? They're not successful. I don't care if they're happy. Are they successful? And it's
and it's like they really just bolstered all of the weaknesses in this girl. Like you guys said, like they never provided that support for them. We're like Alyssa's being preyed upon at every turn because even though she was, successful in the way that they wanted her to be in this kind of academic bookish way, she was horribly unsuccessful in her navigation of the world and like social dynamics and conflicts. And they never provided the support for her to build skills there because they just, I mean, they never cared about either of the girls' needs and what they needed to provide support for. And on the flip side, with Meg, she wasn't successful in the way they wanted her to be successful. And so they didn't provide support to actually help her get where she needed to go or what would help her. They just discounted her. And, Meg was able to kind of navigate her sense of worldliness and identity a bit more because she, basically did a thing where she was like, well, if nothing is ever going to be good enough for you, then I'm going to go out and exist on my own anyway, because what else can I do? But like we see from her time in school now that like she she needed support there to just be able to work through things, and they didn't give it to her. Like they just really, they didn't do anything to actually develop strengths in these girls and balance out their weaknesses as people. They just looked at them and like let whatever was already happening go to the extreme.
right. It's like, sometimes people have children and it's like they are just having children because they want them to carry on some kind of legacy and not because they actually care about families, because they actually want to be a father.
Mhm.
And that's definitely how Alyssa's father reads to me, is, he wants a legacy. He wants people he can boast about. He, doesn't matter if they're happy. Happiness to him probably comes with success.
Yeah.
Um, and when we see that he is the sole person in his family who is working, that, as there's kind of that emphasis on their money. I'm pretty sure we talked about this last week, how there could be an implication that they are not so financially well off later on in the story, perhaps due to having to cover up what happened with Alyssa in middle school, maybe. Um, it, and it's kind of like, he's probably not a happy person. His family is not
No.
successful in the way that he wants. So why would he think of their happiness if he himself is not happy? And this is something that I think of a lot when I think about, like having families and that typical expectation that people grow up, they get married, and they have families because that's just what you do, right? And it's like, but what is your reason to have a family? Are you a person who wants to nurture a family? Are you a person who actually feels like you want to take care of somebody and nurture somebody? And I think that there are an awful lot of people like Alyssa and Meg's father who think, okay, you have children because that's what you're supposed to do, but they don't actually want any part of the child rearing, right? Like maybe if they'd had a son, it would have been different. Is he unhappy because there isn't a son to carry on their lineage? That's,
It's very possible.
hmm. Um, and,
And
and
it's
I
like,
think, oh, go on.
I was gonna say, and like we even see in that flashback that Alyssa has to their home where they're yelling about how Meg is a failure, um, at where Alyssa's mother, and I don't think that we saw them talk as much about Meg's needs and what their kind of plan for Meg was, but it's probably because at that point they weren't caring about what Meg was doing, which again is the whole thing. That's like her whole thing, where no one cared what she was doing or what her actual strengths were and what her needs were. But their mom, as much as there are problems with her, tries to say like, I'm worried about Alyssa's social development. Like she's naive, and now we've taken her out of school. Like, we need to do something. And her father is basically like, no, we don't. Like, that's stupid. Like, I'm glad she's not in school because then she would have just turned out wrong. It's like what she needs to be doing is focusing on her skills and, her studies and such, so she doesn't turn out a failure like Meg. And it's just so very much that focus on like how these children can be used as their legacy, and absolutely no focus on actually nurturing these children and what their needs are and being a family. And it just makes everyone in that home tense and unhappy and unfulfilled and unloved.
It is such a miserable family. Like, even though their mom plays that domestic housemaker role so well, like you have to assume that this is a very depressed woman. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to just based on everything.
And I
Um,
mean, that's part of like Alyssa says pretty explicitly that she doesn't want to be anything like her mom, but from the way that Meg interacts with the world, I get the impression that she doesn't want to either. Like this is a woman that neither of them want to live her life.
right. And I think for Meg especially, it's very, I'm going to say the word fortunate that she and YuJing reunite. Um,
Mm.
be- because we find that YuJing has been a very interesting influence on Meg. And this is one of those points where I know it can be controversial. So again, we are addressing this not in a debating if Meg's intentions are good or bad kind of way. But, we see that Meg is starting to change, the way that she's acting because, Eugene has kind of come back into her life and basically, like, it's kind of happened off page, but, she's basically been like, girl, you're a fucking mess. Look at yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
she like came in with that wake up call.
right. And to be fair, it is what Meg needed because
Oh yeah,
until now, Meg has
been a
absolutely
mess.
completely right. She's lacked that self-awareness to really see herself for what she is and who she is because presumably she's probably been clinging to a fantasy that she has probably conjured up in her mind born of this very desperate obsession. You know, I think in this is one of those things that maybe Alyssa and Meg have in common, where, we've talked about how perhaps Alyssa sees Kosuke as that socially acceptable kind of safety boat, like if she must marry a man and, society dictates that that's the future that she likely has to go on, Kosuke seems like the safest option to Alyssa, right? And likewise, Meg probably saw him in that very, like Prince Charming, come to rescue me kind of way, even though Kosuke never gave her any indication that he was on board with that. But, clinging to that concept or that moment that he gave her that validation that she sought. He gave her that encouragement. I feel like it, spun up this very, he is that Prince Charming that I want to rescue me kind of fantasy that, clearly went places.
Yeah.
And I think, again, like I said, she didn't have that self-awareness clearly, because, she's sitting there talking to YuJing at the Christmas party, and she's like, "Oh my God, is that how people saw me?" And it's like, I mean, girl, there's some other things to be concerned about, but yeah, people, that is.
And there's also like with both of the Cho sisters, and like again, this isn't like excuse or justification, because a lot of people will bring up the like Yui saying that it's okay doesn't make it like any less Meg's fault. But in a similar way that she latched onto Kosuke the second that he showed her that validation, because he was probably the first person who ever did, then Yui comes in, his, super powerful, charming, sparkling Hirahara heiress mother, getting kind of introduced into her life in a very similar way that Alyssa likely originally saw her as, the anti their mother. And
Mm-hmm.
she's providing this validation for Meg as well. The like, sweetie, like you can be, you can be the heiress with him, like, oh, like you're doing so well, like he has to love you, like not providing
Men
her the
love to
same,
play hard to get. That's just how men like to be, honey. You just have to keep trying. Work a little harder, sweetie. Oh, was
right?
he mean to you? Here, I'm going to go buy you all of these fancy bags. I'll make it up to you.
And it's
Like,
like
it's
from this combination, Meg finally has for the first time validation and support and a path, and like you said, that Prince Charming fantasy, and like the fact that Yui is saying like men like to play hard to get, just keep trying harder, doesn't make it true. And like that's ultimately not why Meg believed it, likely, but it's the fact that Yui was validating and encouraging her, which is something that no one else in her life ever does.
right. And, again, it's like you said, Yui is very much being paralleled against their mother in the whole, I wish my mother was more like this person. This is the kind of person I want to be. This is the glamorous life I want. And this woman is basically telling me how I can have that life.
Mm-hmm.
Again, she is lying to these girls. She is manipulating these girls. She herself is literally feeding in to, like the way that they are pit against each other, because like that is one of those things that when I started to pay more attention to Kosuke and Alyssa, and back when I was like, does Alyssa like Kosuke? Before we realized, oh no, that girl is not into men. Um, you know, Yui is very much driving a wedge between Alyssa and Meg, and she needs to, because she needs Alyssa to be isolated, but by by associating Alyssa and Kosuke, it would create more of that tension for Meg, because how is it fair that Meg has essentially been promised Kosuke by Yui? She doesn't exactly do it in those words, but she kind of does, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's just like, right, like they are both being manipulated by this woman. And like you said, it doesn't justify things, but we can understand how Yui is absolutely feeding into the obsession, feeding into the delusion, and literally encouraging this girl to assault and harass her own son. And it's just like, in Meg's delusional head, it's like, oh, she's giving me her endorsement,
And
It's just,
especially especially for the Cho sisters who were raised homeschooled in an abusive home with, a father kind of ruling by that iron fist where like basically the only thing they were ever taught is to, I say respect very loosely, to respect your parent, that your parents always know what's right. They are the authority, they are the end all be all, and their parents were living vicariously through them. So when Kosuke's mother encourages her and says it's okay, it's like, well, that's not only am I being encouraged and validated by this sparkling woman who's everything that I could want to be and nothing at all like my own horrible parents, and she's encouraging and validating me on this Prince Charming fantasy I have. The parents are the highest authority. And we see that play out in the way that both Meg and Alyssa go with what Yui tells them and are susceptible to her manipulation.
And ultimately, that is what it comes down to, is the fact that they are raised in this household where not only are you meant to respect parents, but it's just Yui represents everything that they both want for themselves. And it's that feeling that if I follow her, maybe I can end up where she is too. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that is something that we cannot deny about Yui, because we see it even with Shanae. Like she also from the get-go sees Yui and she's like, wow, she is this beautiful, glamorous woman. What does she even want with me? It's only, when Yui starts getting really weird with her that she starts to be a little apprehensive. And it's not until she's at the formal when, everything actually unfolds when she even realizes that Yui's actually a witch.
Yeah. And
It
it's,
Oh, go on.
I was saying, this is like, you know, obviously Alyssa feels that discomfort internally, unconsciously, and is is really uneasy around Yui, but hasn't consciously had that realization. She hasn't had someone to validate that fear of Yui that's different from her initial perception in the way that Shanae has and in the way that Meg has now found in YuJing. Like we said, their relationship is kind of an integral setup in that turning point for Meg where she she gets to have YuJing, this very truth seeker, no nonsense character, kind of come around and like validate her personhood while also being like, girl, you are such a mess, and like trust me, you don't want to be doing this.
I feel like, as with most characters, the Kim Formal was such a big turning point for Meg, and coupled with, yes, Eugene coming back into her life and being very much like a rock character for her, who can be very
Mhm.
straight with her, but also, yes, give her that kind of encouragement, because we've seen that with Eugene and Shanae, and how we kind of want Eugene to have more of that role in Shanae's life. And I
Mhm.
look forward to getting to see YuJing and Meg hopefully have more of that, where, YuJing is somebody who, as that investigative journalist, she can see in people like Meg kind of like, what is motivating this girl? Why, what kind of reasoning causes somebody to act this way? And, more than that, she is somebody who probably is very much like, girls should stick together. Yeah, Meg is a hot mess, but you know what? With good support, hot messes can be redeemed. And I'm
Right.
not saying redeemed in that sense of, like what she's done. I'm saying
Yeah,
like
not like
hot
forgetting
mess.
all of it.
Right. I mean, hot mess in the sense of, you can turn yourself around. You can become a person who doesn't throw yourself at everyone and anyone who gives you that validation. You can become a person who validates yourself.
Right.
And
And that's so much what, I mean, that's what a lot of characters need, but especially the Cho sisters. Where
yes,
like they're both chasing so hard validation and love from other people because they were taught their whole life that that's the only way to get it, that what has their own attempts at self-love ever done good for them at their father's home? But that's so much what they need. And we talk, well, I don't know how much we've said it on here, but we've talked before a lot about YuJing being a foil to Yui, and one of the things with her is that she does seem very much like girls should stick together. But in the while Yui also thinks that girls should stick together, and does it in a "I'm gonna break you down" way because of her own trauma with the patriarchy. YuJing does it in a much more actually helpful and supportive and authentic way of like, girl, you may be a hot mess, but like with just a little bit of proper support, like we can get your needs met and like have you express your authentic self in a way that is gonna help you in this world, not not hurt you.
YuJing wants to build people up.
Mm-hmm.
We see that definitely in how she treats Shanae. We see that in how she treats Meg. We even see it in how she treats Kosuke, even though it doesn't look that way. Because, YuJing has layers of resentment based on how Kosuke has failed her in the past and how her friendship with him has crashed and burned. But that also has so much to do with the fact that YuJing, a lot like Null, so badly wanted Kosuke to break free of, what binds him, the shackles that are. She wants him to be his own person and free himself from everything that's holding him back. She wants to build him up, but he went back to his family. He, in her eyes, he abandoned them. He failed. First off, he failed them when, she sent somebody to him, somebody who desperately needed his help, and he turned them away. And it ended in a very horrible, tragic way. And she's never been able to forgive him for that. But then following that, he abandoned them and went back to the family. And, like with that kind of sense of, I don't have time for this. I'm too important and too good for this. This is like a whole trajectory. But the point is, YuJing's thing is she wants to build and support people. Like you said, that is
Yeah.
the way that she foils Yui.
And she really is, like you said, that kind of like rock and stable foundation. And like I said, like she's that kind of like truth seeker and justice seeker where like she's not going to do the work for you, like, which is also a foil to Yui, where like Yui gives people things and hands people things, and often she has a very specific intention for what's going to happen with those things. But Yui does kind of give those handouts in her process of breaking people, whereas YuJing does not do that. She is very much like, to I am going to give you the objective perspective and the tools and the foundation that you need to build yourself up. I want to see you build yourself back up.
Right. Like, YuJing is a really interesting character to me. They're all interesting characters to me, let me be honest. But especially in the way that she foils Yui. In that, YuJing is set up to look like she is the good to Yui's bad. And, fandom very much treats her that way. But YuJing she's a pretty neutral character. I'm using
Mhm.
neutral here pretty loosely because we do acknowledge, and I've talked about, at least in the server, that YuJing definitely has her own personal, biases. And, we've seen that she is only doing this favor for Rand. Because, Rand is a person who has helped her in, her own life, but also because it aligns with something she's also working on for herself. We as a fandom regard YuJing as a truth seeker, and I don't deny this because she clearly is an investigative journalist. She is very determined to be impartial and show the truth, kind of uncover the actual stories. But that does not deny that YuJing, she definitely does things for her own motivation, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's really important that as a fandom we acknowledge this because again, I feel like sometimes she gets stuck up on this pedestal where she's regarded as being somebody who does things because she believes ultimately in justice. And I'm not saying that she doesn't believe in justice, but I don't think that is her sole drive, right? You know?
No,
Um,
and it's and like when we talk about her as like an investigative journalist and the truth seeker, like ultimately, like you said, she is neutral. Like it's not
mhm,
that she's, completely removed from what's happening, but it's like the the truth and like the exposure of the truth isn't synonymous with like righteousness and good
mhm,
faith. And we see that, for example, in the way that she is likely going to use post-gays trauma history and victimization by Yui and expose it. We're like, is it the right thing that she is going to tell his story for him, and that, you know, depending on how it goes down, that could be where he finds out about a lot of these things. Um, and like when he's not ready for it. I
and
like
oh, go on.
I was gonna say like we're like I feel like that's kind of a good example of like she she is chasing in that scenario justice for her own motivation. She's not in it just because she believes that the elites are corrupt and need to go down, even though that's probably a belief she does have. But she's ultimately she's on this path, fighting this battle, seeking this truth because of what happened to her friend. She wants that personal justice to be served, and she's willing to expose truths that people aren't necessarily ready for because of it. And that, in my perspective, kind of helps illuminate for us the difference between Eugenia's neutrality and like, kind of saint righteousness, where there's more layers in there than just the truth seeker in opposition to Yui is, fighting for righteousness. There's a lot more layering and a lot more of that like true neutral vibe that Yujing even says herself. She's not here to clean up other people's messes and to necessarily like do the right thing. She's here to expose the truth and serve her interests.
And to that point, I think it is absolutely worth, mentioning the fact that in knowing that she has to expose things about Kosuke, we have to acknowledge that she doesn't really feel that bad about it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a part of her that relishes in it because she carries that resentment and bitterness about how he failed them and how he hurt them. I think, we have to acknowledge that YuJing is so hurt by Kosuke because at some point in time, their friendship meant something. Like we can tell that like they are probably some kind of like rival friends in the past, but the fact that she still holds on to those feelings, like we obviously know it has a lot to do with, what happened to the person who died and presumably took their life. But, there's so many feelings that are tangled up in there, and that while she is seeking justice, part of it is that she is seeking justice from Kosuke. And
Mm-hmm.
then, when we're talking about, YuJing, who, like EJ in our chat says, is not a saint, um, she is very much, she's reacquainted with Hansuke, somebody she was friends with back in college. And I'm not saying that I think she has befriended him solely to get information. I think, I think it's something that has like, it's perfectly lined up for her where it's like, oh, yes, my old friend who I'm actually really enjoying hanging out with again. but happens to be providing information that I can use that he doesn't realize I'm using. And like what that's going to do to their relationship when this information all comes out, because presumably, and I cannot remember if we've talked about this on the podcast, but I have written about this here in the server. We have talked a lot about how we believe that YuJing might, in fact, actually be working on two separate articles. The first of which is the piece that she's working on for Rand about Null. And that would be the piece that she was talking to somebody about in, was it episode 150?
Yeah,
When
it was
Null had pled
150.
guilty? Okay.
Yeah, when
Where,
she was watching the guilty plea on the television.
yes. And she called somebody and she basically said, we've got 120 days to do this, less or maybe less, implying that she wants this article to coincide with Null being released from jail.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
and
she even said
then,
that the guilty plea might work in their favor.
yes. So the current thought is that maybe the first article is the one for Rand, and perhaps this might be one that's set up, and this part is all suppositional right now, but maybe it's kind of like set to be about, Null taking the blame for Songchul, and the fact that we are bringing in Kosuke's parentage makes me wonder, is this this is probably the article where it's going to be revealed, because what a bomb is it to reveal, according to the Mukoyoshi theory, Null is in fact the true heir to the Hirahara family, and he has been framed, or not even framed, he's basically been cornered into pleading guilty for something that he didn't do. The drugs weren't his. And then later, after the big time skip, so this one would probably drop after our little time skip. So after Null is getting out of jail, we've time skipped to probably sometime in April, sometime in spring, or around Shine's birthday. Null's getting out of jail. That's when that article would drop. And then later, after our big time skip, some point, that's when YuJing would drop the much bigger article that would be about the Kims and Yui in general.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I going with this? Okay, so I feel like, obviously that first article is going to be such a big blow to Kosuke because, revealing A, that he's not the heir, B, Rand isn't even his father, and then like what it will do to YuJing and Hansuke's relationship, what it would do to Hansuke and Kosuke's relationship. Oh God, what a mess. And I feel like, it's the way that YuJing has talked about it too, with like, her eyes closed and stuff. She doesn't feel entirely bad about what it's going to do to Kosuke, because there is a part of her that still carries that bitter resentment, that is still so mad at him for denying somebody who needed his help, who is so mad at him for turning his back on them. I know Elle pointed this out when that episode dropped with the flashback about how Kosuke belittled her major and how she is now using that major, her career, her investigative journalism, to uproot his entire life.
And it's like I get the impression that it does, and I feel like it has to feel like such poetic justice for her in so many ways, where like the first thing is, with especially this reveal being about Kosuke's parentage and his status as the heir and his relationships with people around him, like that was the reason that he gave for denying that girl help and for turning his backs on all of them. And, we saw her yelling at him where she was like, don't use that excuse that it's because family comes first. Like, I see how you treat your brother. Like, I know that you're lying to yourself when you say that. But that was the reason that he seems to have always given them. And she is going to expose that was all based on a lie. And not only is she exposing that, she's using her pitiful degree in journalism that he belittled her for to do it, where she is basically launching an attack that, he's not the target, he's collateral damage, but on this person who spent his life running from the truth with that very truth that he belittled.
Yeah, and it's like, like you said, he's collateral damage, but she is not going out of her way to spare him.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, go on.
It's that like, again, it's that, Yui-esque foil of that kind of the end justify the means. This is what I need to reach my goal, and nothing's going to stop me from reaching it. She wants that justice for what she is attached to in her own personal life, and she is, like you said, she's not going to go out of her way to spare Kosuke to do it, and she is going to feel a little bit of vindication and justice served in it, even though he's not the target. Like you said, we don't get any indication that she really truly feels bad that this is going to blow up.
And that's what makes YuJing so fascinating to me. It's people in general would like her to be a saint, but she's not. And that's why she's such an interesting character. It's
Mm-hmm.
the ways that she is similar to Yui that makes her more interesting. Very much like, we've been talking about how Noel's anti-hero arc only became interesting to me when I could see it as a parallel to Yui. YuJing being this person who is serving justice in the ways that she is similar to Yui is what makes her so fascinating, because self-serving characters are so often made to look like they're bad, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole thing about Alyssa. People see her as being self-serving and that makes her bad. But YuJing is very much a self-serving character. Like, even though I said it is a very fortunate thing for Meg that YuJing has stepped into her life, YuJing has only done it because she has need for Meg.
Mm-hmm.
I think she will continue to make use of Meg, but, she did not befriend Meg out of the goodness of her heart. Like, she full on told Shanae that, like, she's very acquainted with Meg, and that she has in the past had to tell Meg some very harsh truths. Um, YuJing is a very self-serving character, but because we regard YuJing as like being this very strong, independent, dare I say, my least favorite way to describe a female character, badass, suddenly it's a good thing. And, misogyny. We could talk all day about why self-serving is bad in this female character, but in this female character, we applaud it. But that's not what we're here to do today. YuJing, though, I mean, clearly, YuJing is like one of those characters who, as far as we can tell, I think she is on the more well-adjusted side. We don't know a lot about her past or her family or where she comes from. We can only assume that she runs in a similar circle to Kosuke because they attended the same high school. If I remember right, YuJing is like advanced as well, right?
Yeah, she seems to be right in between Kosuke and Hansuke.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, but she was in the same year as Kosuke, despite being, it seems, about 2 years older.
Right. They seem to be in the same social circle. She was at the Kim Formal, which again we know is a very elite event. It's not nearly as open as the masquerade event that everyone was able to attend. Um, so I mean, with all of that in mind, like I said, again, we really don't know a lot about her. We do know that she says in the past, she's kind of indebted to Rand because in the past he has helped her out. I I know people kind of assume that it must have had something to do with the friend who died. Um, and I assume that probably was just because with the way that Kimchi has been telling the story, I feel like it would have to be connected to something that she's already hinted to us so far. It would feel weird to kind of like be something that has yet to come up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for the most part, I think YuJing is one of like our more well-adjusted characters, but
I
I'm kind of
think
using that loosely.
I do think well-adjusted in anything related to kimchi is a loose term, but I do get that impression. And I think we can also see that by the way that she is more able to reach her goals than everyone else. Like your ability to reach your goals in I Love You seems to translate pretty well to how well adjusted you are. And that's that thing where a lot of time kimchi will pit someone's unmet needs against their perceived goals, and then it's kind of up to them whether they have the support and realization to, you know, turn around from that terminal bus and get on the other side of the street. Um,
Right. Because like um
um
because I was
but
gonna say with YuJing, it's kind of hard to be like, what are her unmet needs? Like she is kind of trucking along meeting her needs, or at the very least, if she has unmet needs, she's doing a good job concealing them.
mhm.
Conceal, don't feel, which, I think is pretty well adjusted because everyone else does a pretty bad job
Yeah.
about concealing.
She
Um,
has the
she's
physical ability to. Like, well, we know that she's not all fine and dandy and good. Otherwise, she wouldn't be harboring so much resentment for Kosuke and carrying around kind of the burdens of her past in college and such in the way that she currently is. But overall, in her general life, I get the impression that she is definitely one of our more well-adjusted characters.
she does also imply that she has grown a lot since at
Mhm.
least college. Like when she's at the nightclub with Kosuke and he is, you know, tearing and notes that she is not as modest as she used to be in the past. There's this implication, or she implies that she has become a lot more confident in who she is now and in how she carries herself and the way she holds herself and stuff. Um, so yeah, I think.
YuJing
Oh, go on.
YuJing is able to do what so many of our characters have been utterly denied, where she is able to be her authentic self and have it work for her.
Like YuJing is the goal. Like she is who everybody is desperately hoping they one day will become
Yeah,
without
and that's
realizing it.
and again that parallel to Yui, where like all of these girls saw Yui and thought, that's the life that I want, that's who I aspire to be. And then through following Yui, were led farther away from it as Yui kind of pulled them down. But with YuJing, we have that foil and that flip where YuJing is really who all of these people look at and want to be and the life they want. And she actually helps bolster the girls that she takes in and give them the tools to develop that.
And I think that further creates that foil between Meg and Shanae against Alyssa,
Mm-hmm.
because both Meg and Shanae now have been taken under YuJing's wings. You know, Even though Meg was very wary and reluctant of YuJing because, the general past.
Yeah.
Like I for all of the grievances about Meg, I still really love that she, she ends up going to the Christmas party with YuJing, and that, they picked out outfits together. Like, there's definitely this hint that it was, probably that Meg was helping YuJing with her article. And so, this is, like
Mm-hmm.
something that they were doing at the same time. But I like that it's, like it's still an act that is helping Meg take those steps towards maybe one day being able to become somebody who is more like YuJing.
Yeah. And
But it, further shows that that wedge is driving between Alyssa from, Meg and even Shanae. That they are people who are going to be benefiting from people like YuJing, who, like you said, bolsters them, encourages and fosters their growth, versus Alyssa, who's being isolated and smothered and drowning in the darkness.
and we can see so clearly the opposition between the YuJing and Yui trajectories, when not like we can see it in when we look at the girls themselves, but even when we look at YuJing and Yui as people, we're like, YuJing doesn't have that kind of glamour starstruck aspect to her as Yui upon first meeting her. She doesn't carry that same kind of power and control and influence that Yui does. But again, YuJing is able to be her authentic self and, be this like strong, independent woman in a way that is beneficial and like self-actualizing, where we've talked about before how Yui, despite appearances, is someone who is filled with uncurbed and, rotting away rage and hurt and trauma, and who every single day has to go out and play a role just to maintain the control that she has within a system that she resents, within a system that oppresses her in as not I don't know that I would say as much as she oppresses other people, but oppresses her while she oppresses other people to maintain control of it. And
Right.
she like she doesn't get to be her authentic and actualized and, in any way peaceful or truly happy self, even though she has this power and this kind of glamour and this aspirational nature to her. Whereas on the very flip side, YuJing is wholly nowadays her authentic and confident and actualized self, which is what all these people truly are aspiring to be.
Yui is literally taking it out on those girls too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, the way that she pits the girls against each other, the way that she's manipulating them and, having fun watching them be miserable, versus the first time that Shanae actually meets YuJing. Like, I'm not counting the whole, at the formal. The
Mm-hmm.
first time she meets her when Kosuke is taking her to pick out clothes, before YuJing has any knowledge that Shanae is connected to the case that she's working. She offers her polite advice that, hey, judging by your demeanor and the clothes that you're wearing and, your kind of awkward disposition, I can tell you these clothes are not for you, not
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think you're good enough for them, but because I can tell that you're not going to feel comfortable in them. I think these kind of business clothes would be much better suited to you. Um, and how, like, obviously at the time that was a moment that foiled to show that Kosuke had no concept of, like, understanding Shanae's comfort levels. Further, really to just show that Kosuke was just basically dressing Shanae like his mom dresses, because that's just kind of like his concept of this is what a corporate woman looks like. But it goes to, again, show that even though, yes, YuJing is a self-serving person, she, she is somebody who wants to help build people. Again, Shanae was just a stranger, but she was like willing to lend help to this person. And I think, again, that's why I really like that thought of YuJing and Meg going shopping together, even if it's still ultimately and on the record, I, need you to help me dig up some dirt for this piece that I'm working on. It's just, it's nice to see characters get built up by
Mm-hmm.
YuJing, especially for somebody like Meg, who's basically been torn apart by and manipulated by Yui.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a pointed foil, and like we said, like YuJing is not a saint character. Like she really falls much more in that vein of neutral, but she she is so much about that, truth and authenticity, and that helps build people up in a way that is actually beneficial to them instead of, these other people in their lives who just tear them up and tear them down and try to shove them into what they want them to be because they think, well, this thing will make you happy or fulfilled. YuJing is very much of the awareness that the only thing that can really make you happy and fulfilled is being supported and being who you are in a healthy way.
And especially with, instilling that confidence of yourself, being able to be the person who validates yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that she heavily sees in Meg. It is, like knowing that Meg can be a more bearable person, somebody that others can stand to be around if she herself is able to give herself that validation that she seeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because, now she's not obsessively chasing for it through, from people who don't want to give it to her. Now she, it, I, I don't like the whole adage that nobody can love you until you love yourself first. But I do think that there's something to be said about how we very often have to be the people who learn to accept ourselves first and foremost, because, you know, we're the people who are inside of our heads at all times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we we see ourselves for who we truly are, and therefore we should be the people who give ourselves the most grace and the most forgiveness, and the ones who are there to validate ourselves and be like, I see that you're trying and I understand you, but also it is good to have people like YuJing in your lives who can also back you up. I think, like, I think that's a good way to think about it, because obviously if you can validate yourself, you can be your most authentic self like YuJing. But it also helps to have those people who back you up and help you believe that when there are days where it's harder for yourself to actually believe that it's true.
Yeah, it's like you just said, that support helps you see the validation in yourself to give yourself. And it's ultimately like, in the same way that other people explicitly not validating and not accepting you can degrade away at your own self-acceptance and validation, which is very much what we saw with both Alyssa and Meg, where we don't know what they were like, you know fresh out of utero, but by the time that they were adults, whatever self-acceptance and validation they had was just destroyed by it being constantly attacked by their parents. In the flip side, while that, in the same way that it being attacked and unvalidated and unaccepted can wear away at your own self-concept, having your authentic self supported and bolstered and validated and accepted by other people can help bolster your own personal acceptance and validation of yourself.
Right. It's not so much that you need somebody to validate yourself. It's just that additional level of support.
Mm-hmm. And that's, we talk all the time about, I love you is so much about being loved and giving love and receiving love. And it's like, you, what was I about to say? What did you say a minute ago?
Support. It's like
Oh yeah, that
having
that that you need that support. Like, everyone needs to be supported. there's no world in which like only having yourself is truly the best option, because we are social creatures, we are loving creatures, and we need to both receive and give authentic support.
And that is truly what we see with Shanae's story, is that her life has only become more bearable when she has opened up to let people in, when she has learned to rely on people and lean on people. The whole, love is knowing that it is okay to be a burden to people, because the people who love you don't think of you as a burden. And
Mm-hmm.
like I don't think of YuJing, like it's clear that YuJing is not a sappy person, but I think her, like I think if she and Meg continue and become friends, because, I'm not going to delude myself and believe that she and Meg right now are friends. Like it's clear,
Mm-hmm.
they both, Meg still has apprehension about her, but, you can tell that I think there's that sense that she kind of wants to lean into it, but like she's got some pride issues. Um, she's got the whole she's made a fool of herself for many years thing going for her. But supposing that YuJing actually wants to have a friendship with her, I think it would be a really good thing for her to have it, have somebody who is so supportive of her and says the things that she is actually needed to hear, like have the crucial support. She's back at school trying really hard to actually finish for once. Having somebody who can sit by and say, hey, you're trying, good job, keep it up. Even something that simple, because that's what we saw from how she responded to Kosuke, would be
Mm-hmm.
good for her. And especially because YuJing is the kind of person who is very straightforward and she won't sugarcoat things, and, she's not going to lie to Meg and, let any delusions run forth. She would be really good at being able to help keep Meg in check, kind of like
And
you were a
especially
hot mess, girl.
and especially for someone who has kind of had so many different narratives run around her and has been chasing so many different goalposts, it's going to be really helpful for her to just have that, straightforward YuJing just telling her what it is in a way that, isn't negative. Um and we see that YuJing has that kind of unique way that she cares about people, where she often kind of cares from a slight distance, but in a, like we've said a bunch of times, in a wanting to build people up and wanting to expose the truer and better parts of themselves. Like, as much as her like treatment of Kosuke can cross some
Hmm.
lines, ultimately the core there, when we get rid of her resentment feelings and her, you know, indulgence in that kind of poetic justice with him. This was somebody who was once her friend, that she saw a positive and more authentic version of himself, which I don't think College Kosuke was necessarily truly authentic Kosuke. I think he was free from Yui Kosuke. So a different brand of Kosuke with kind of a different array of authenticities and meeting expectations. But she saw someone more positive and authentic than who she sees today. And many of the ways that she kind of antagonizes and breaks him down are trying to chip away at that wall to bring that person back out, because she knows that he's in there and she knows that he can be that person and that he can do better. Where, she's not standing next to him holding his hand through it, she's not sugarcoating it, she's definitely not going easy on him. um but she does have that unique way of caring about him, and I think that generally reflects in the way that she cares about people, where there's that air of distance and that kind of a bit of even like air of aloofness, which is what kind of gives her that like girl boss reputation. But she wants to help build people up and give them the foundation to bring out the better parts in themselves that she can see are kind of hiding under there. And I think that specific brand of caring about people is going to go a long way with Meg, somebody who has been torn down and manipulated and chasing other people's validation her whole life.
I think even without knowing anything about her family, we can probably assume that maybe her parents were a tough love type. And not, like tough love in the really negative way, but tough love in the way that she shows Kosuke and others her tough love. I feel like she has to have learned that from someone, and that's probably how she became the version of herself that she is. Um, but I was going to say something about this too. Where was I going with that? But yeah, that's very much how I feel about her and Kosuke, is that it's been very clear all along that she misses her friend, or
Mm-hmm.
even if she doesn't miss him, it's the fact that, yes, she knows that somewhere in there is a version of Kosuke that she met in college. The person who she was friends with, the guy who went to the club with them somehow, even though he graduated at 14. Like the guy who went and got his ear pierced because they probably goaded him into it,
Mm-hmm.
it's the way that she, like you said, she kind of like antagonizes him, trying to drag something out of him. She's very much like Noel in that sense, that she's been trying to pull him out of those shackles, and it's like, I have seen who you were. I know that this isn't who you are. She
Mm-hmm.
knows that he's pushed into a role. She knows that he is being somebody who is not who he truly is. And it's kind of like, why are you doing this to yourself? Why is this the person that you are deciding to be? Because that's
Right.
the thing, right? It's like, of all the people that you could be, this is the guy that you've
This,
decided you want to be. The person who turns people away when they need you. The person who turns on your friends. This guy who just like decided to abandon his friends and go spend this lonely, awful life living like this. This is your idea of life?
right. And it's like, again, it's YuJing and Yui both see straight through people. They see through all the facades, all of the strengths, all of the weaknesses. This is excluding how Yui misread Shanae, which is that is her fatal flaw in this whole series. She misread Shanae, and boy, has it already, and is it going to continue to come back to bite her. But for the most part, both of them really just see right through people. And while Yui uses that to turn people into tools and break them down, YuJing very much wants to bring out who she knows they can be. She's, she like I've said many times, she's not going to hold their hand through it, but she's going to build that foundation for them and give them kind of let them see that in themselves too, so that they can hopefully decide that they do want to be that version of themselves that she sees that they were or could be, and then work towards it.
We have a question in the chat that I would like to answer. It's not entirely related to goals and motivations, but it's still related to what we've been talking about, and it's something that I would like to spend a little bit talking about. EJ asked, after YuJing drops the article, do you think she will befriend Kosuke again after the time skip? And I have thought about this a lot, because we know that clearly after the first article, and this is why, like, I brought up the articles earlier. We know after the first article, it's going to just like decimate everything, right? Like, assuming that the theory is correct that there will be 2 articles, and that the first article will be about Null, and it will reveal that he is, that he is Rand's sole child, that Kosuke is not, in fact, Rand's son, and therefore, the heir is questionable. We are operating off of the Mukoyoshi theory being true. I'm assuming that this is the kind of thing that the article would also mention. But the point being, we know that this is going to decimate everything. We know that Hansuke and YuJing's relationship is just going to be like, friendship is dunskies, because like, how could, I don't think
He
Hansuke, who feels
explicitly asked her not to.
Right. And like Hansuke, who feels so much loyalty to Kosuke, like how could he, continue being friends with somebody who just like literally is revealing such personal things about Kosuke? And I feel like Hansuke, even if YuJing tried to say that, there's no personal feelings, like Hansuke's not gonna believe it. I still, like I said earlier, I do worry about how it will affect Kosuke and Hansuke's relationship. But that part aside, my my very indulgent dream is I do very, very much want to see YuJing and Kosuke one day rekindle friendship. To be clear, when I say friendship, I think Kosuke and YuJing have always been like the kind of competitive friends who deep down they enjoy each other's companionship, and YuJing clearly like enjoys riling him up, and Kosuke would never admit that he really enjoys YuJing's company. But I feel like so we've had the college friends, right? They have entered the story. So I feel like something has to come from that, right? Not just the fact that we have addressed what happened during college, but the college friends have entered. We know Kosuke is going to be going through it for a long time, because we know, again, what's going to happen when the parentage is revealed. Like, that's going to further ruin Kosuke's life. But I think there is room for friendship if, and as we hope will happen, Kosuke is able to be his authentic self. And I don't mean that, like Kosuke has to know who he is. It just has to be Kosuke trying to live for himself. It doesn't have to be that he knows who he is. It just has to be that he's not trying to be. Yes.
Yep. Like letting go of chasing other people's desires.
Yes. I think that's all YuJing really wants for Kosuke. Like, I still think that she's always going to antagonize him. I think they will always bicker. I think that's just like the kind of vibe that they will always have, and that they've probably always had. But, I think there's kind of like a difference between, like antagonizing because you have that bitter resentment versus antagonizing because this person is just fun to pick on, right? And like we see that even now, like with how she likes to pick on him. That element is there, and I think there is a possibility, but it can only happen if, right, Kosuke lets go of all of this. Or, even if he decides that, yes, he does want to continue working for Hirohara, but, it's not because he's, as long as he's not being an asshole to everyone because he's the heir, like that's the thing. We, of course, dream of Kosuke going back to his piano roots. I know Noel would like to see that, and I think YuJing would probably like to see that as well. And I think she would be very supportive of it, even though Kosuke would probably read it like, you're just being sarcastic and you're just, antagonizing me. And she'd be like, I'm actually being supportive, like I can just see them bickering about it,
I feel like there is very much room for them to become friends. Like, I don't think they're ever going to be, that super sappy, close, like Hansuke Kosuke type friends
right.
or like anything like that. But I think I think they can get back to a place where they are friends and are in a more positive spot in each other's life. I think that when the article drops and all the bombshells, like we know that they're playing on opposing teams of that chessboard, assuming that YuJing is the Black Queen in her, both the way that she's been introduced in the imagery around her and the moves she's been making, and her acting as a foil of Yui. But it's going to be hard for a while for either of them to be able to be a truly positive or friend space in each other's life. I don't think that either of them are going to be ready for it for a while. But I do
Right.
think, especially when all of this is said and done and everyone is in a better place and has kind of gotten to those goals and had some of these needs met and fulfilled, I think there is absolutely room for them to come back to a state of being friends. And I feel like that's part of the narrative trajectory where like YuJing truly has been fighting so hard to get back the Kosuke that was her friend. And she wouldn't be doing that if she didn't care. And Kosuke, like, he wouldn't be entertaining being around her if he like didn't care about her at all. We're like,
Right.
there's still that residual kind of desire from both of them to be in each other's lives. And I think once they're in a place where they can kind of settle these grievances with each other and where they're both personally in a better place and not actually fighting each other anymore, just, just banter fighting, I think there's room for it.
I think another really important thing is a resolution about the college incident,
Yeah.
because we know how Kosuke feels about it. We know now how it happened, what compelled him, like we know like that kind of paranoia that was instilled into him, and why at the time it was such a difficult thing for him to even, entertain the possibility of it, because in his mind he had been set up to believe that people will do anything to bring, to tear them down. And for him to be able to face YuJing one day and apologize about it, or apologize for it, because I think he will. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is the whole point of us, seeing him go through that flashback with that realization in the bathroom, having, staring down at his reflection in the toilet with just like this absolute remorse of realizing that somebody died because he didn't take action, because he didn't listen, because he rejected them in a time of need. Like really comprehending the role that he played in this, and the way that his mother shaped him into it. I think, one of these days they will have that conversation. I think that is also part of what YuJing is waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think she's necessarily waiting for the apology as much as the acknowledgement of
Yeah.
what
Just that
happened. Right. Um I'm starting to feel a little choked up about this suddenly. Um because like I get really emotional about the idea of Kosuke reconciling with people. And especially in this specific situation with, you know, the acknowledgement, because right, like I think that's all she wants, is for him to acknowledge, I failed, and I failed you, and I failed them, and that I specifically failed this person, and to just express that remorse and show how truly regretful and remorseful he is, because he didn't do it because he's truly an asshole. And even though like I don't think YuJing will ever stop seeing it as an asshole thing, and that's okay, because she's very well entitled to believe that. But what matters is that she understands, or that, she sees how bad he feels about it, I guess, that she sees the regret and the apology, that she sees that the Kosuke that she has been trying so hard to reach is still there. Yeah, I think that's ultimately what she wants.
And again, it kind of like it comes back to that kind of meta role of YuJing as the truth seeker and the journalist, where she wants him to face the truth about it. Where like you said, like it doesn't she doesn't need it to stop being a bad thing that he did, or like an awful situation, because that isn't synonymous with him being a bad and awful person. She just needs him to acknowledge it for what it was and demonstrate that he knows what happened there and how awful it was and what he did to everyone, including himself, this whole time, and to come back from that instead of running away from it.
Right. It's not about seeking forgiveness. It's about setting himself free and becoming that authentic version that she's been trying to pull out and trying to seek.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that is absolutely the role that she is playing in his life. And I'm really, really hopeful that by the end of the series we'll at least have an indication that they will have that friendship, like even if we don't get to see it, or like if Kimchi does some like spin-off stories to kind of like show us, like, oh, here we are like 1 or 2 years later and this is what everybody's lives are like as they're moving on from things, like, maybe we get to see Kosuke at a piano recital and Hansuke and YuJing and maybe some old college friends coming backstage to, give him flowers, and YuJing is antagonizing him and they're bickering, but we can tell that they're not bickering because they hate each other, but just because it's, that kind of rhythm that they have. And I need to learn how to draw better so I can draw that for myself.
Oh, I feel like the theme of this episode has largely been the concept of drawing out people's authentic and confident and truthful, validated selves. And I very much look forward to everyone who will get there and the relationships that will both lead them there and form when they get there.
Me too. Like, I know, like, we haven't talked a lot about YuJing and Shanae's relationship, but I do think, I think in the future we will get to see them a lot more, because like right now, Shanae's still a high school kid and YuJing is a grown adult, and it's probably like, there's not a lot there just yet, right? But soon, we'll be getting there soon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do look forward to seeing what she draws out of Shanae. I look forward to seeing what she'll draw out of Meg. Like I am very hopeful that the YuJing and Meg duo will continue and might actually become a real friendship, because God knows Meg needs a real friendship. She needs somebody who is going to be real to her face and is going to both encourage her and help guide her, but also tell her like it is. It's what she needs.
Right. And like I don't think that I had quite realized it and thought about it until there was one day where we were having that argument about the Cho sisters' responses to trauma and why we think it makes sense that both of them reacted in this way, and like it's not a game of, well, Meg processed her trauma in this way, so I don't get why Alyssa couldn't, or well, Alyssa processed her trauma in this way, so I don't get why Meg couldn't. Like it's very much a result of the exact way that their parents positioned their family dynamic to set themselves up for that, because they were not treated the same. They weren't born the same people. They weren't treated the same. But, that concept of like Alyssa being a bad friend comes up a lot, and that came up. And someone tried to use Meg as a counterexample, and that was the moment that I realized, and I think other people had already realized it, but I hadn't thought about it, that we never see Meg having any friends. Like Meg just doesn't, she doesn't have any.
She
And
doesn't
like,
talk about friends. Like, as far as we know, she doesn't do things with friends. Like, if she is doing things, it's like it's her hanging out with her sister.
right, like
That's
it's not that Meg was never a bad friend, it's that she never managed to have friends at all. And that's part of why I'm so hopeful about her relationship with YuJing, because not only is it kind of set up to provide that validation and support and building up that Meg needs and has never gotten, and that truly so many of our characters need. Um, but it's also like, I'm happy that she might have a friend for once.
and like a good friend, and actually like somebody
Mhm.
who cares about you and wants you to be the best version of yourself that you can be, friend. Like, somebody who is going to help you thrive. Like, I think, like we said, the thing that both Meg and Alyssa are very lacking in is that they haven't really had any guidance, or at least any healthy guidance. And I think that's something that YuJing will be really good at. She can't tell Meg how to live her life or who she should be. But like you said, YuJing is very good at drawing those authentic parts out of them. Like,
Mhm.
who really is Meg? We don't
Right.
we don't know very well how to describe her. Like, we know, like, we could describe her, but the Meg that we would be describing is, like, her very obsessed with Kosuke fanaticist side, right? Because, like, when we compare that version of her to who she is post formal, we can see there is a difference. There's the, one version of her is this very exaggerated version of herself, compared to the version of herself who's kind of like, I feel like I handled things at that formal very badly. I realized that whole night I was chasing around somebody who didn't even want to be around me. And, you know, by chance, I stumbled upon the opportunity to help somebody, that somebody being Noel and Shanae. Um, that realization that because of the way that she had acted in the past, Kosuke didn't even believe her when she said that Shanae was in danger. And it's just like, you're comparing these two versions of her, and it's like, who is she? And it's a lot, like, I I think the thing is, like, with Alyssa, she does have that more defined personality. And I think partly that does have to do with the way that their parents have treated them, right? Because, what we were talking about is they've been funneled into those roles. And Alyssa, she's got things that she's good at. She has clear likes and dislikes. And she's developed this personality that responds to the role that she's been pushed into. Whereas Meg has basically been
Meg
spending
was
this
George.
Right. And she's been spending this entire time trying to figure out who she is, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, if nobody's going to pay attention to me, I'm just going to do whatever. And now she's just kind of like here, and it's like, who are you, Meg? Like, what is your core personality, aside from, because like, aside from the trauma, who are you?
Right. And it's like you said, like it's not telling them who to be, because truthfully, the so much of what has hurt all of these people has been being told who they should be. Where like, even if someone sees you authentically and is like, I can see that this is the best version of you, if they just tell you to be that person, it's not very helpful. But what is going to be helpful for them is that, just supporting their own journey, and helping with that view of kind of the objective reality and the vision of self, and letting them actually truly explore and figure out who they authentically are and want to be and support them in that.
I really look forward to getting to know more about Meg and, figure out who is she. Let her figure out who she is and how YuJing will help her pull out that authenticity and figure out who she is and who does she comfortably want to be.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like we are good to wrap.
Yeah, I think so too. That was a very good way to end.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank all of you lovely people for being here, and go out and live in the world as your authentic self.
Yeah.